A huge eye suddenly opened in the sky, terrifying everyone who saw it. From that I descended the Demon King, followed by countless other monsters. Standing against them were the Divine Knights, warriors who served God by making a vow to him. They gained supernatural powers and managed to push the monsters back. But the demon miasma, a toxic substance in the demon realm, lingered in certain areas at dangerously high levels. Most people who were corrupted by it died, and the rest suffered horribly, turning into demons themselves. Vice Commander Kieran of the Divine Knights' 9th branch arrived too late, looking at the devastation. He says with sorrow that everything here has already been decimated. A soldier comes up from behind and reports that a red moon has appeared. Sure enough, the massive crimson moon looms above. Everyone knows what it means. A powerful demon is about to emerge. Then they suddenly hear a heavy thud from a nearby building. One of the soldiers nervously suggests that they should just return to headquarters, warning that the red moonlight is pouring in and they need to be careful. But when they cautiously check the building, instead of a demon, they find a human baby. 15 years later, inside a grand castle, crowds gather as someone tells them that the reason they can all eat in peace today is thanks to the Divine Knights, and that they should dine with gratitude in their hearts. At one table, a group of kids chat among themselves. One of them complains that his portion is too small. A boy named Lycus speaks up and explains that when he was a baby, demons attacked his village. He was the only survivor, and the Divine Knights took him in to raise him here. The others mutter that it's strange for a baby to survive such a massacre. They whisper about the large birthmark on his face, calling it proof that he's a monster. Because of that, Laika isn't exactly well liked. Another kid even takes away his food, saying that it's more than enough for a monster. All the children in this facility have lost their families to demons or monsters, and the hatred they carry often turns against Laika, the one they suspect of being a monster. Then their attention shifts to a newcomer, another child who had arrived only 2 days ago. That kid's parents had just been eaten by a monster disguised as a human the other day. Even after this, the others blamed Laika, saying it was his kind who did it, and they demanded he apologize to the grieving child. Laika refuses and insists that he is human, but the kid bursts into tears, screaming at him to give them back, crying that he should return his mother, calling him a monster. Laika feels crushed, knowing there's nothing he can do. Another boy then slams him to ground and orders him to apologize again. With no choice, Laika eventually mutters an apology. This has been his daily routine for over a decade. By rule, no one is allowed to leave the facility until they become an adult. However, in the year they turn 15, a priest from the Divine Knights is dispatched. At that time, anyone who wishes can take the selection test, pass it, and they can leave the facility to become Divine Knights. Fail it, and they remain behind. Now, only 5 days remain until the test. Laika feels suffocated here and swears he will use his chance to escape by becoming a Divine Knight. Finally, the day of the ceremony arrives. Laika stands in line with the other candidates. One boy sneers at him, saying a monster like him could never become a knight. The priest then begins the ritual. He explains that each of them must step forward one at a time and make a vow before the sacred chalice. If the liquid turns blue, they cannot become knights. If it shines gold, they may drink from it, gaining the power of a knight by binding their vow to God. To make a vow, each must offer up what is most important to them. He warns that the ceremony can only be performed once in their lifetime, so they must be cautious. The boy who always bullies Laika is the first to step up. He vows that no matter how dangerous the monsters are, he will take every one of them down. The chalice glows gold. He drinks, and his body surges with newfound power. He laughs with joy, saying he can feel it overflowing from his very core. The others watch in awe. Another candidate follows, vowing to live as a wanderer without family after leaving this place, since everyone here has become like family to him. Again, the chalice glows gold, and he too gains the power. More children step forward, and each time, the chalice shines gold. Finally, it is Laika's turn. He steps forward and vows that he will become a knight in order to protect people. But as he tries to complete the vow, his mind falters. Deep inside, he realizes he cannot think of anything truly important enough to offer. Laika struggles to think of something he can offer. He admits to himself that he just wants to leave this place and be happy. But he has nothing. He never had anything. Still, he pushes himself to think harder. He tells himself that he has to find something, anything at all, something important inside of him. Finally, he considers offering something from his body. At that moment, the chalice suddenly turns purple. Everyone stares in shock, unable to understand what just happened. Even the priest looks baffled and admits that he has never seen such an ominous color before. He then declares that the ceremony is over and orders everyone to disperse. Laika doesn't like this. He wants to know what will happen to his ceremony, but before he can ask further, the priest tells him that his ceremony isn't over yet and then suddenly strikes him. The meaning becomes clear at once. Even the children who had only suspected him now believe without a doubt that he is a monster. Some of them immediately draw their weapons, ready to kill him as their first act as knights. They rush at him, shouting that they must not protect a monster disguised as a human. But before they can strike, the priest suddenly shouts at them to stop, saying their power is not meant to be used against humans. In that instant, everyone feels it. Something else is there. A terrifying presence looms nearby, and soon they see it. A monstrous figure, horrifying appearance. Even the priest acknowledges what it is, calling it a demon, and orders everyone to evacuate so they can call the divine knights. Panic breaks out. People scatter while the monster wreaks havoc, confirming without a doubt that it is indeed a demon. The boy who had always bullied Laika freezes. He remembers his vow to reach God and swore never to run away again. But when faced with the approaching demon, he cries out helplessly for someone to save him. In the next moment, the demon tears him apart before Laika's eyes. The other newly empowered knights step forward, declaring that they must fight since that is why they received their power. But one after another, they fall, slaughtered by the overwhelming demon. Laika wonders how he, who has never been accepted and who has no real power, could possibly stand against this monster that none of the others could stop. The demon then turns its gaze toward him, extending a huge, grotesque tongue. Laika wonders if this is the end. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he notices a chalice. As the tongue lashes toward him, he makes a desperate decision. He dashes the chalice and tells himself that he would rather take whatever fate it brings and die here. He drinks the contents in one gulp. Instantly, a tremendous surge of power floods through him. His whole body feels cold, but energy is overflowing from deep within. The demon hesitates, clearly unsettled, before attacking again. This time, Laika moves with speed he never had before, dodging its strike and rushing forward. He unleashes an explosive force. Explode. That tears into the demon. The battle ends with Laika collapsing back to ground, his power fading. He has returned to his normal, powerless self and is completely exhausted. Someone who had been watching from behind stares in disbelief at what just happened. Laika also notices something shocking. His severed arm has been restored. He wonders if what just occurred was some kind of purification. Suddenly, a massive sword cleaves down and strikes the demon's corpse, pinning it to the ground. A commanding voice explains that leaving such a huge body would spread demon miasma throughout the city, and apologizes for arriving late. Then the voice turns to Laika and asks if it was him who defeated the demon. Laika realizes the one speaking is a divine knight. The knight praises him, saying that he is quite something. Defeating such a monster is no ordinary feat. This knight is none other than Arthur, the commander of the divine knights. Her massive magic sword gleams, unlike anything Laika has ever seen in his life. He can only think, so this is the true power of a knight. Arthur thanks Laika for what he did, and soon the other knights arrive, trailing behind their commander. Arthur scolds them for being too slow. Laika realizes in awe that this person is the commander herself. He thinks that if Arthur acknowledges him, then perhaps he can finally leave the orphanage. Driven by that thought, he suddenly rushes forward and bows deeply before her. He tells her that he has always admired the knights, that he has always wanted to become one, and pleads to be allowed to join. But then a boy behind him suddenly shouts, demanding that Arthur kill the monster while pointing directly at Laika. Arthur frowns and says that it is a dangerous way to speak about a friend. The boy insists, however, that Laika is the sole survivor of that destroyed village. The knights murmur in surprise. They remark that Laika transformed without making a vow, yet wielded such terrifying power. They say that there's no way he could still be human. Laika protests, saying that it isn't true. Arthur responds before anyone else can. She walks straight to the boy, flicks her finger against him, and sends him flying. She reminds everyone that Laika did, after all, save them, and she makes it clear that she doesn't appreciate such talk. The boy instantly changes his tone, begging for forgiveness, which even surprises Laika. Arthur then turns back to Laika and asks what he meant about not having made a vow. Laika explains that he had been about to speak his vow when the demon appeared, but instead he drank from the sacred chalice and somehow gained the power to fight. He insists that this must be the power of a knight. Arthur shakes her head. She explains that without making a vow, one should never be able to obtain the power of a knight. She wonders aloud what on earth Laika actually offered, and with whom he really made his vow. Was it God or something else entirely? She stares at him, waiting for an answer, but Laika can only remain silent. Finally, Arthur says that he has piqued her interest. She tells him that it will be faster if she sees his power with her own eyes and asks him to show it to her. But Laika has no idea how to summon it. He explains nervously that his body transformed on its own during the fight earlier, and he doesn't know how to control it. Arthur doesn't seem interested in excuses. She simply says they should make this quick, then suddenly grabs Laika and hurls him high into the sky. Arthur cannot believe how far Laika has been thrown, yet she simply calls out for him to show his power now. Otherwise, he will fall to his death and no one will save him. Her soldiers, watching from below, whisper among themselves, calling their commander a demon for treating him this way. As Laika plummets through the sky, he wonders what is wrong with that woman. Passing through a cloud, he tells himself that if he is going to die, then he has to use that thing. If not, he will be smashed against the ground and die anyway. But before he can act, a massive shadow descends upon him. It's a sky-eater bird, one of the apex predators of the upper skies. Its habitat is here, and there's no time for Laika to remain calm. If he is eaten, he won't survive. The bird opens its maw wide and swallows him whole. Arthur and her soldier watch from below. The soldier immediately prepares to jump to his rescue, but Arthur stops him, saying that this is unexpected, but perhaps the perfect chance to see what power Laika truly holds. The soldier mutters in frustration that this is exactly why she is called a demon. Inside the bird's stomach, Laika finds himself surrounded by corpses of others who were not so lucky. They are long gone, and soon he will share their fate if he doesn't act. Then he notices it. Several grotesque tongues slither within the stomach walls, reminding him of the same monstrous tongue from the demon that had killed his fellow children during the ceremony. The memories sting him deeply. He thinks bitterly that the orphanage and the divine knights may be terrible, but dying in a place like this is far worse. That thought ignites something in him. Once again, he transforms, power surging violently through his body. On the ground below, Arthur and the soldier watch in anticipation. The soldier asks why she is so reckless, but Arthur replies that she simply wants to understand a kind of power capable of defeating an unclassified demon alone. She wonders aloud whether it will be a boon to humanity or a curse. Before the soldier can respond, the sky-eater bird explodes from within. Laika bursts out of its body, transformed, glowing with overwhelming power. He continues to fall, but this time he forces a massive blast of energy downward, slowing his descent. He crashes on the ground in a controlled landing, staggering but alive. The soldier rushes to him, grabbing his shoulders and checking his condition. He is shocked to find that Laika is perfectly fine and unharmed. Arthur, however, assesses him differently. She remarks that to defeat such a monster alone, he is already at least at the level of a vice commander. She then looks at Kieran, the commander of the 9th branch, and reminds him that 15 years ago, he had been the only one who opposed killing the mysterious baby. That baby has now grown into quite a remarkable sight. Kieran says nothing at first, then admits that perhaps it might have been better for Laika if he had died back then. Arthur ignores the sentiment and addresses Laika directly. She calls him boy and announces that he will now be taken into their custody. His unknown power must be kept under the watch of the divine knights. She adds that humanity is running out of time, and in their current situation, they cannot afford to be picky about their forces. No matter how uncertain Laika's identity may be, they need every shred of strength they can find. Laika wakes up inside a flying chariot, drawn by bird-like horses. Still groggy, he looks around in confusion, trying to understand where he is. When he notices the carriage floating high above the ground, he cannot hide his surprise. Arthur explains that they are on a tight schedule and had to leave before he woke up, apologizing that he wasn't given a chance to say his goodbyes at the facility. Laika immediately wonders if this means he is now officially part of the Night Order. Arthur smiles and confirms, telling him that from today onward, he is under the care of the Night Order. The words don't bring the comfort Laika expected. He questions what being under their care really means. Arthur calmly explains that his existence is an irregularity, even for the Order itself, and whether he can be trusted will depend entirely on his actions going forward. Laika isn't satisfied with the answer, but he thinks that if it means leaving the facility behind, then it's good enough. Curious, he asks what happened to the facility. Kieran explains that the building was badly damaged in the recent incident and will soon be dismantled. The staff and children are to be scattered and relocated to other facilities. Arthur adds that many of the children who had just formed their covenants lost their lives in the attack, which he calls a terrible shame. She then asks Laika if there was anyone he wanted to say a proper goodbye to. Laika thinks back to the people there and realizes none of them ever treated him kindly. He tells them that there isn't anyone. Changing the subject, Laika asks where they're heading. Arthur replies that they are traveling to the Night Order's headquarters in the holy capital of Alha. She gestures toward the horizon and points out that it can already be seen in the distance. She tells him that many members of the Order, including new cadets like himself, are stationed there, since in this era calamities from the mythic age could return at any time. The explanation confuses Leica further. Looking outside, he notices a massive crack in the sky. Arthur explains the history behind it. Long ago, a rift had torn open in the heavens, from which poured demonic essence and demonic beasts born of another world. At their head was a demon king, a godlike being of insatiable greed, who spawned as avatars, the celestial demons, and defiled the land with corruption. The Night Order that age fought back, sealing the demon king within the rift and binding the celestial demons across the four corners of the continent. Arthur explains that humanity's habitable lands have shrunk because of that rift. No one knows exactly where it leads, she says, but they do know it's slowly widening, and that only the Night Order can stand against it. Then she admits she has high hopes for Leica's power. She tells him that something about him grabbed her attention. The light in his eyes when he transforms, the sword of flame, the explosive attacks, and even the way his severed left arm healed. She confesses she has never encountered a power that intrigues her so much. She still doesn't know what Leica offered for his covenant, she says, but for now she wants him to use that power with him for the people's sake. Leica answers that he will gladly do so. Before he can settle on that, Arthur tosses a job at him and literally hurls him out of the flying carriage. As he falls, he braces for impact, but lands perfectly, surprised that it doesn't hurt at all. He marvels that this doesn't feel like his old body. A voice from the carriage explains what's happening. Those who form a covenant gain two kinds of power: special abilities called divine arts, like Arthur's sword and Leica's transformation, and a physical enhancement far beyond ordinary humans called protection. The Night Order's duties aren't just slaying monsters. The voice says cleaning up the mess from that rift is Leica's first assignment. When he's done, he's told to run to the city and not get the directions wrong. The carriage departs. Leica, still confused, hears footsteps nearby. Armored men approach and remark that the Night Order's sky carriage has already left. They notice Leica and ask who he is and whether he made all that noise. One of them, clearly the leader, sizes him up and declares that a lone kid in the forest is likely an abandoned child or an orphan whose parents were killed by fiends, which, in the leader's view, only makes the kid easier to sell. Leica realizes with a sick twist that these are bandits. Then Leica sees smaller children clustered around the bandits. The bandits order the kids to come quietly, making clear they'll sell anyone who resists. The sight throws Leica back to his own childhood. When the leader gestures for Leica to come over, Leica answers without hesitation. He tells him to let the children go, calling them scumbags. This is the first mission the commander gave him. He reminds himself, now that he's part of the Night Order, he'll deal with these bandits. The bandits stare at Leica unsettled. They mutter among themselves, wondering if this brat is part of the Night Order too. But their leader snarls that it doesn't matter who he is. He's standing in their territory, and that's all they need to know. With a shout, they draw their swords and charge. Their blades come down all at once, but the ground is all they strike. Leica has vanished. Confusion spreads through the group as they whip their heads around, trying to spot him. Then, from behind them, his voice rings out. He warns the children to stay back, and when the bandits turn, his steady gaze sends a shiver down their spines. Desperate, one of them pulls out a crossbow and fires, but the boy disappears again before the bolt even comes close. They whirl to find him standing at another spot and let loose another volley. This time, however, Leica channels more of his strength. His body shifts, his form flares with power, and the sheer force of it shocks every bandit who lays eyes on him. In that form, he declares that he'll end the fight quickly. The bandits, panicked, shout that he's a monster, but before Leica can advance, one of them plays a final card. A hidden bandit has seized a child as a hostage, pressing a blade against the boy's throat. The captor snarls that if Leica takes even one step closer, he'll slit the child open. The children watch with wide, anxious eyes. Leica, caught off guard by the move, slowly raises his hands and tells him he understands. He won't come any closer, he says, but the bandit must release the children. The man sneers at that, mocking him. These brats, he says, are merchandise. Their families are already dead, slaughtered by demons. Left alone, they just rot and become monster feed. He insists that selling them to some greedy noble is the best future they can hope for. Before he can finish his vile sentence, a sudden flash of energy cuts across the space. In an instant, the bandit's hand is severed, sending him to the ground screaming. The children gasp. Leica is still standing with his arms raised, calm and unmoving. He simply reminds the man he promised not to come closer, and he didn't. Even without stepping forward, he crushed the threat. Laika looks down at his hands and realizes something new that wasn't just a sword. He had projected a strike of pure energy. He hadn't even known he could do such a thing. So these divine arts, he thinks, are far more versatile than he realized. Lowering his voice, he turns to the frightened child and asks if they're all right. The kid stares at him with wide eyes, still trembling. The others do too, and though Laika saved them, he can see the thought flickering in their faces that maybe he isn't human at all. But the monster the bandits cried out about after the fight, Laika sits down beside one of the trembling children and tells him it must have been frightening. The child only nods in silence, still wide-eyed. Laika gives a faint smile, but as his fiery form fades away and he returns to looking human, exhaustion hits him all at once. He slumps forward and passes out. At first, the children hesitate, but then they rush to his side. When he doesn't wake, they decide to drag him together toward the city. Kieran soon comes across the sight of a group of scruffy kids struggling to haul an unconscious boy. When the children spot him, they explain that the mister told them to come here, and that after carrying him all the way, he suddenly collapsed. Kieran mutters that it's unbelievable, causing trouble even for the very people he saved. He sighs and says it'll be one demerit for the boy as he picks Laika up onto his back. Laika, however, remains asleep and hears none of it. Later, when the branch leaders gather, their opinions are quick to clash. Fran, the second branch chief, looks at Laika's sleeping face and says that it's so adorable she'll give him a perfect mark. Her deputy, Kenneth, groans that their branch chief is far too soft and says he'll give the boy a big fat cross since he looks like an idiot when he sleeps. Grift, the grim fourth branch chief, declares that exhausting one's strength on a mere cleanup job is utterly preposterous. Jack, the sixth branch deputy chief, adds that it heard rumors of the boy being treated like some assassin, a monster in disguise. But after seeing him like this, he finds it disappointing. He shrugs and says they'll just have to see what the boy does from here. Arthur listens to them all, then remarks that for an evaluation of a rookie who just completed his very first errand, everyone is being rather harsh. She concludes that his observation will continue, and that what they need is to see more growth from him next time. Laika, still asleep, remains blissfully unaware that his very first job has already stirred such divided opinions within the Night Order. The next morning at the Night Order headquarters, a lavish meal is prepared. The sight alone makes Laika's mouth water. He can't believe all of it is for him, and that he gets to eat it all. He digs in so quickly that he nearly chokes, only for someone nearby to offer him a cup of water and remind him that he can eat slowly. They tell him that here, no one is going to steal his food. For the first time in his life, Laika realizes he can eat in peace. No beatings, no scraps of garbage forced on him, just real food. He is so relieved he came to the Night Order, and the brand new uniform on his back only adds to the feeling that this is a fresh start. While he's still enjoying the moment, another man steps into the room and calls him Ryuka. Laika nods in confirmation, though he wonders what this is about. The man steps closer, inspects his face, and then remarks that he has the face of an idiot. The jab stings, and Laika feels a flicker of irritation. The man then tells him to follow, whether he's worthless trash or a useful idiot. He says he'll find out soon enough. He introduces himself as Kenneth, Vice Commander of the Night Order's second branch, and makes it clear that for now, Laika should shut up and not ask any more questions. Before leaving, Kenneth glances at a woman standing nearby and asks how long she plans to stay in that outfit, since it's time to go. He addresses her as Branch Commander Fran. Later, Laika finds himself trailing after Kenneth with Fran at his side as they make their way through a forested area. The atmosphere makes Laika uneasy, but Fran's calm presence helps. She tells him not to worry, reminding him that while they have a lot to do today, the goal is for everyone to return safe and unhurt. Her gentle smile soothes him a little, though Laika can't reconcile this friendly woman with the commander he had glimpsed earlier. She doesn't look like someone important at all, yet everyone calls her branch commander. Kenneth soon announces that they're almost at their destination. Fran then goes over the details one more time. That morning, on the outskirts of the royal capital, a monster sighting had caused a wave of panic. When Kenneth and Fran first arrived, they assessed the situation and confirmed that the damage was minor, but it still required a quick response. That was why the two of them had been dispatched. Fran adds that since they happen to be here, they may as well use a chance to see what Ryuka is capable of. After all, the other branch commanders have been debating what should be done with him, so today will serve as his first real evaluation under the Night Order's care. Ryuka thinks to himself that if this really is an evaluation, then does that mean he could lose this new life? The very thought makes his chest tighten. Anything but that, he prays. Fran gently pats his head and tells him that she has high hopes for him. explaining that she has already heard of his skills from the commander. Those words seep into him warmly, and Ryuka starts to feel a flicker of confidence. He tells himself that if he performs well here, maybe he will be allowed to stay, since their opponents are only monsters. He thinks the Kurinim should be able to wipe them out easily, but Kenneth immediately smashes that fragile confidence. He tells Ryuka that those are bold words coming from someone who had to be carried home by the very child he saved. Ryuka freezes, unable to understand how Kenneth even knows about that incident. Kenneth continues without mercy, saying that if either the branch commander or he himself judges Ryuka useless, then he will be expelled from the Night Order. And judging from that idiotic face, Kenneth adds, that is likely what will happen. The words hit Ryuka like a hammer, and he bursts out in frustration, demanding to know what makes Kenneth so high and mighty. He says that they look about the same age, yet Kenneth acts so superior. Kenneth only narrows his eyes, as if wondering if this fool is really daring to speak back. Friend quickly steps in between them and urges both to stop fighting. She then apologizes to Ryuka, telling him that because of Kenneth's covenant, he cannot help but speak with brutal honesty. She asks Ryuka if he can forgive him. At that word, Ryuka blinks. A covenant? So if that's the case, then does Kenneth really honestly, deep down, think that he looks like an idiot? Kenneth does not hesitate and tells him yes. Ryuka's face burns with rage, while Friend looks utterly exhausted by the bickering. Kenneth then asks Ryuka if he has even made a covenant yet. Ryuka snaps back that he hasn't. So what? Kenneth explains coldly that a covenant is the heart and price one offers in exchange for power, and the greater the sacrifice, the greater the strength. Ryuka surprises him by saying he already knew that, but before he can puff himself up further, he suddenly feels a cold gun press against his back. He stiffens in shock. Kenneth's voice comes from behind him, telling him that in the Night Order, 1/3 of recruits die within 6 months, either killed by monsters or broken by their covenants. That is the kind of place this is, he says, and then he asks if Ryuka still intends to step forward without the resolve to sacrifice anything. Ryuka trembles, fear gnawing at him, but then he clenches his fists. Friend raises her voice, telling Kenneth that enough is enough. Yet Ryuka himself speaks up passionately. He admits that it is true he hasn't properly formed a covenant yet, but he insists that because the commander took him in, he now has good food and a soft bed. He escaped that hellish facility. He tells them that he doesn't care about covenants or sacrifices. He will do whatever it takes to remain in the Night Order. As his emotions pour out, raw energy suddenly bursts from his body, radiating wildly. He shouts that he will cling to this place with everything he has. The power surges so strongly that even Kenneth is forced to step back, realizing his divine arts tool isn't able to suppress it. Fran's voice cuts sharply through the aura as she orders both of them to stop. She tells Ryuka that his determination and energy are good, but he should channel it into their work. Then, as if on cue, the forest around them stirs, and dark figures appear from the shadows. The air grows heavy with killing intent. Ryuka realizes that danger is closing in. Fran's expression hardens as she tells him that there are plenty of monsters ahead, and their task is to face every last one of them. As the troop of monkeys senses their opponent's auras flaring, they immediately launch into motion. But Ryuka and the others are ready, slipping past the first wave of attacks. In an instant, Ryuka mutters to himself that was close, only to freeze when he notices something alarming. Their tails. Those tails glimmer with a deadly sheen, and when one lashes against a nearby tree, the massive trunk doesn't just snap, it dissolves into nothing. Ryuka realizes the truth with chill. Those spines are laced with poison so fast and vicious that even a brush could mean certain death. He barely has time to process it before several more monkeys close in, their tails whipping towards him in a storm of death. He curses under his breath, thinking it almost feels like cheating. Then, cutting through the chaos, he hears Fran's cheerful voice. She announces that she will be leaving the rest to him, explaining with unnerving calm that with this many monsters, there must be a fiend nearby commanding them, and she intends to scout ahead. Ryuka stares after her in disbelief, but before he can shout back, Kenneth is already moving. The vice commander's gun snaps into line, aura surging, and with a sharp crack, a bullet tears through the air. Ryuka realizes in shock that it isn't aimed at him but at a monster right behind his back. Kenneth tells him bluntly that if he thinks joining the Night Order is going to be a picnic, then he should just sit down and stay out of the way. Ryuka grits his teeth. Those words grate worse than the monkey screeches. But as he tries to push himself up, a shadow falls over him. Another monster monkey has slipped behind, its tail ready to pierce him. Instinct takes over. His sword erupts in aura, slicing clean through the beast. Ryuka roars aloud that he has to join the Night Order, no matter what. Kenneth scoffs at his declaration, saying words are cheap. If Ryuka is truly serious, then he needs to prove it. And with that, the fight becomes a test. Kenneth fires, the recoil echoing as wave after wave of monkeys drop under his relentless barrage. Ryuka slashes wildly, meeting tails and claws head-on with the blazing edge of his aura sword. Together they cut through the swarm. But Ryuka can't help noticing something that stings his pride. Kenneth moves like a machine, his kill count climbing effortlessly. He fights with precision, each bullet claiming another target, while Ryuka struggles to keep pace. Down in the thick of it, surrounded by corpses and howling beasts, Ryuka has to admit it through clenched teeth. Kenneth really does deserve the title of Vice Commander. That man is on another level. Frustration wells up inside him. He pours his rage into the sword, forcing the flames to surge and the blade to grow larger. His strikes cut deeper, but the drain is immediate. He can feel his stamina burning away with every flare of power. If this keeps up, he knows he will burn out again before long. Then Kenneth's voice cuts through the chaos, sharp and dismissive. He asks Ryuka if this is really all he's got, and with that same cruel smirk, he tells him that if he's planning to take a rest and space out, he should at least find some shade first. Ryuka feels irritation boiling inside him. He hasn't stopped swinging once. Yet Kenneth looks like he could keep firing all day without even breaking a sweat. What's the gap between us? He wonders bitterly. Kenneth offers no answer, only the rhythmic blast of his gun as he keeps mowing down monkeys. Finally, Ryuka blurts out the question gnawing at him. How could Kenneth keep firing like that? Didn't he run out of ammo? It looked no different from leaving a faucet running. Kenneth, true to his covenant's curse of honesty, explains without hesitation. His divine arts tool creates a bullet every time by feeding in mana. That was exactly what Ryuka had expected. This guy really couldn't lie. So if asked, he'd spill his power without thinking twice. But hearing the explanation only makes Ryuka's thoughts spin faster. Kenneth's divine arts work completely differently from his own. Kenneth injects mana in short bursts, each one becoming a bullet. Ryuka's ability, on the other hand, is a continuous flow, like a raging fire that never stops consuming fuel. Even understanding that, Ryuka knows he can't mimic a gun, and if he keeps dragging the fight out like this, the outcome is obvious. His strength will drain away long before Kenneth ever slows down. So he makes a decision. Power surges out of him in waves, his aura flaring bright enough that Kenneth pauses mid-shot to glance at him. The Vice Commander wonders if Ryuka is simply giving up, unable to adapt, unable to think of another strategy. Kenneth decides in that moment that once the branch commander returns, he will report that Ryuka doesn't belong in the Night Order. He resumes cutting down more monkeys, certain the fight is already decided, but then his instincts scream. A colossal aura sword is forming overhead, radiating danger. Kenneth's eyes widen in shock. Ryuka calls out to him, voice raw with determination. Tricks were never his thing anyway. Efficiency, strategy, mana cost. He throws it all away. He decides to go all out, no matter what it takes. The monkeys around them hesitate, even recoil, unnerved by the sheer destructive energy gathering at Ryuka's command. Kenneth leaps clear, knowing what's coming. Ryuka roars that they should get far away, and then brings a massive sword down. The world shakes. The ground is split wide open, a massive crater carved out in one strike. A dozen monkeys vanish in the blast, leaving nothing but silence and smoke in its wake. When Kenneth lands again, he finds Ryuka collapsed in the middle of the destruction, body trembling, completely drained. The boy can't even lift a finger. Still, Ryuka turns his head weakly and forces out the words. He wants to know if Kenneth saw it, saw that he wiped out far more enemies in a single strike than Kenneth did with all his bullets. He demands recognition. But instead of mocking him, Kenneth's expression twists into something grim. Ryuka frowns, confused. What's wrong? Then he notices it too, from the corpses scattered across the ground. Thread-like strands begin sinking into the soil. For a heartbeat, everything goes still, and then the bodies twitch. Kenneth shouts in alarm. It's a trap, run. But before Ryuka can even move, the earth beneath them trembles violently. The ground splits apart, and from the depths, an enormous mouth bursts upward, fangs glistening as it swallows a battlefield in shadow. They're both really surprised by the sudden appearance of the monster. As they grab each other's hands, Ryuka unleashes a burst of energy at the monster, pulling them away from getting eaten. While they're still hanging there, both of them wonder what this thing even is. If they hadn't reacted in time, they would have been eaten for sure. Kenneth explains that it's a demon, which means all those monkeys were just bait to lure them out here. Ryuka is struggling now. This is bad. He used up too much strength earlier, and he can't fight anymore. Then the monster suddenly sends its huge tongue at them and grabs both of them. Right then, Kenneth and Ryuka spot a figure in the sky. It's Fran. She notices how wide the monster has its mouth open, which she finds pretty improper. So, in typical Fran fashion, she pulls out a giant spoon and smacks the monster, tossing it out of the ground. The demon gets uprooted along with its roots, But Fran doesn't stop there. She leaps again with her spear and keeps striking it over and over, cutting it into pieces. The tongue holding Kenneth and Ryuka finally loosens, and they both drop to the ground with it. Fran lands soon after, happily telling them they did good work taking care of the monkeys, and apologizing for leaving things to them. She explains that she had sensed the demon's presence, but stay back because she thought it might not show itself if she was too close. Still, she's glad, because to her, it looks like Kenneth and Ryuka have already become fast friends. That makes her even happier than expected. But in reality, neither Kenneth nor Ryuka wants to be friends. They're still not getting along at all. Right now, they just want to get out of the sticky tongue binding them together as fast as possible. Once free, Ryuka can't help but think about Fran. How do you fight something that huge and not even break a sweat? There's no doubt she's on a completely different level. Then he notices Fran quietly praying for the demon. She explains that since it was originally human, she feels pity for it. After every subjugation, she always prays, because demons are just unlucky humans who were exposed to too much magic energy until they turn into monsters. Ryuka understands her reasoning, but Kenneth finds it strange. He mutters that he's never heard of a magic energy reservoir existing around here. For a demon of this strength to appear so close to the capital city, it wasn't completely unheard of, but even Fran agreed that it felt out of place. She started wondering if this was something truly terrifying, and when the realization hit her, she immediately screamed for them to run. Kenneth and Ryuka, however, were still confused. The ground beneath them began shaking, and they froze, unsure of what was happening. Then a voice rang out, and here I thought this child was one of my better creations. They looked behind and saw a figure radiating an immense red aura. Fran recognized it instantly. She already knew about this being. The figure continued, commenting on the humans' deceitful faces and how ugly they were. Fran immediately demanded to know who he was, but the figure just raised a finger, and suddenly all three of them were slammed to the ground. Even Fran struggled to move. Ryuka couldn't believe it. Even someone as strong as Lady Fran was completely outmatched. Kenneth tried to aim his gun, but the figure dismissed him with a flick of finger, disarming him in an instant. He could no longer use his weapon properly. The figure then declared he would remake them, and a tornado of aura erupted behind him. He even intended to make them stronger than they already were. Meanwhile, the monster they had fought so hard to defeat began reassembling itself. Ryuka was shocked, muttering, "What the hell is going on?" Everyone watched in disbelief as the monster took on its new form. The figure seemed curious to see what would happen next. The monster then grabbed Lady Fran, who still couldn't move despite her struggles. Her efforts were futile. The monster opened its brain-like mouth, and Ryuka realized she was about to die. He remembered the smile she had shown him earlier. The way she said her goal was for everyone to return home safely. She had placed so much hope in him, and now it seemed like everything was about to come to an end. But Ryuka's anger erupted. His aura flared wildly as he screamed, "Stop!" The figure froze. Even Lady Fran and Kenneth on the ground looked shocked. Ryuka's body transformed, and he smiled, a monstrous, terrifying smile. Even the figure, Fran, and Kenneth were taken aback by what they saw. Ryuka, fully transformed, immediately conjured a massive aura energy ball and hurled it at the monster. The attack obliterated it instantly and freed Lady Fran. But the effort left Ryuka completely drained. He had transformed into a monster for a moment, then suddenly reverted to his normal form. The figure watched closely, analyzing everything. He marveled at Ryuka's ability to move in a gravity field of such magnitude, and he noted the flames from before. They weren't of this world. It was all fascinating. He grabbed Ryuka and examined him, focusing particularly on his eyes. The dark, crisp red aura within them caught his attention. The figure laughed, realizing something. He commented that Ryuka must have made a covenant with a god from another world, expressing envy at the sacrifice and power involved. Even the monster itself had been taken aback by this revelation. In the next moment, Ryuka struck back, sending an aura sword straight to the figure, taking him down. Exhausted, Ryuka also collapsed, completely drained. Lady Fran managed to rise with Kenneth, who was equally surprised and trying to process whether Ryuka had actually defeated the monster and the figure. Fran looked at the fallen figure and realized it had been just a puppet, remotely controlled, not truly alive. Ryuka, meanwhile, was unconscious but oddly satisfied. Fran, however, couldn't stop thinking about the strength he had displayed. She marveled at how a human could generate such power, capable of creating and controlling such formidable fiends. The thought lingered in her mind. She wondered if this was the work of the legendary magic master ruler Tempest. Later, the sky cleared, and a gentle summons called out to Ashi Tempest. The little kid appeared, sealing himself inside a glowing field while reading a book, completely absorbed. The kid admitted honestly that he had just been having an interesting dream, and on such a beautiful day, a grown man was simply lazing around. He apologized, picked up his book, and said he just found something good in his dream, even though his heart was still pounding a little. The kid commented that getting so caught up in a dream was clumsy for an adult, and he found it quite harsh. He prepared a cup of tea using magic. The kid called him lazy again, and he didn't deny it, admitting that he probably was. He looked up at the sky and said it was beautiful, and that it felt like something fun was about to happen. But then reality snapped back, and they returned to the present where the sky was breaking apart. Kenneth was keeping a wary eye on Ryuka, and Lady Friend followed closely behind Kenneth as they hung on, moving with Ryuka. They were heading toward the royal capital, all while Ryuka couldn't stop thinking about the monster that had been laughing earlier. He reflected on what had happened, considering the monster's words. The power displayed was unlike anything he had ever seen. The chalice it had used was a completely different color from the ones people normally use to gain their abilities. He realized the monster must have offered something extraordinary, something very different from the standard covenants others made. Back in the castle, Arthur and the others were gathered around Ryuka, who was lying there exhausted. They murmured among themselves, questioning if it was true that this kid actually had a contract with a god from another world. Grift, the 4th branch commander, spoke first, pointing out that such a connection went against the very foundation of the Knight Order. Jack, the 6th branch vice commander, interjected, noting that Ryuka had produced a ridiculously huge divine instrument this time. He seemed useful enough. Kieran, the 9th branch commander, agreed, saying that Ryuka had already proven himself to be a valuable asset in battle, and that taking the words of some unknown man at face value was absurd. Then Vice Commander Gavin spoke up, sternly warning that the magic master mentioned in the reports posed too great a risk, and the organization couldn't allow uncertain elements that might only sow chaos. Arthur turned to Fran, who had witnessed everything firsthand, and asked for her opinion. Fran hesitated, but explained that Kenneth and she hadn't been able to move at all in that situation. Ryuka had been the only one capable of standing against a mysterious figure. Without him, they would have died. However, she admitted she wasn't sure if Ryuka could fully control his power, recalling the frightening, demonic traits he displayed. Gavin added that every time Ryuka used his power, he reportedly became completely exhausted and collapsed. Could that really be called controlled? Fran admitted she couldn't give a clear answer. Arthur nodded thoughtfully. He concluded that they needed to know whether Ryuka could truly control his own power, and if he was a suitable fit for the Knight Order. Everyone's eyes fell on Ryuka once more. Arthur then turned to Gavin and asked what it would take to convince him. Gavin didn't hesitate. The trial of the Guarded Flame. Ryuka would have to pass it, at the very least. The room fell silent. Everyone was shocked. Arthur made the decision official. He told Jack to begin healing Ryuka immediately, and Jack sprang into action once Ryuka was stabilized. It was decided that he would be sent to hell. Arthur wanted Ryuka patched up properly, so he lay there, still thinking about that monstrous figure who had laughed at him, remarking on his contract with a god from another world. Those words kept echoing in his mind. Memories of the kids who had teased him, calling him disgusting and asking what he even was, flashed through his thoughts, and he woke up screaming, utterly confused. Kenneth looked up from his book and told Ryuka that he was finally awake, noting how long he had slept even after being treated with healing techniques. Ryuka asked about the mysterious man, but Kenneth explained that the immediate danger had passed. He then admitted that they had been saved this time because of Ryuka, and that he had genuinely been worried when Ryuka hadn't woken up. Ryuka was shocked and asked if Kenneth really meant he had been worried about him. Kenneth nodded and said that since Ryuka had saved them, of course he had. Ryuka smiled a little, noticing Kenneth's honesty, and admitted nervously that he couldn't lie. He thanked him quietly. Then Kieran arrived and apologized for interrupting Ryuka's recovery, but he told him that a decision had been made regarding his future. Ryuka asked what the decision was, and Kieran explained that he would have to undergo the trial of the Guarded Flame. Kenneth reacted with surprise, and Ryuka asked what kind of trial it was. Kieran explained that it was the most dangerous trial in the Knight Order, designed to see whether someone could control their own powers. Ryuka asked if passing the trial would mean he would be formally recognized as a member of the Knight Order. Another voice called him an idiot and explained that the trial was actually for becoming an executive candidate. Normally, only those recommended by 2 or more branch commanders could attempt it. Kenneth reminded Ryuka that he had just received divine magic, and that attempting this trial was almost like a death sentence. Ryuka felt a chill run through him as Kieran added that only a handful of those who attempted the trial ever passed, and that a third of the failures either went insane or died. Kenneth just stared quietly. Ryuka squared his shoulders and told him that he didn't fully understand the danger, But this was the only place he had left, and he would risk his life and give it everything he had. 5 days later, the day of the trial arrived. Ryuka and Kieran stood in front of a cave. Kieran told him that the trial had 2 parts. The first was to survive inside the cave for 3 days. Ryuka asked what the second part involved. Kieran showed him a candle and told him to pour his power into it. When Ryuka did, the candle flared up intensely. Kieran explained that he had to make sure the flame did not go out and that he had to protect it for 3 full days. Ryuka realized that the flame would attract monsters and understood the real danger. Kieran warned him not to die, and with that, the trial of the guarded flame began. In the darkened cave, Ryuka moved cautiously, holding the candle and muttering to himself that it was hard to breathe. He noted that the magic essence in this cave was especially dense, even for the north, which already had a high concentration. That explained why the number of monsters here was ridiculously high compared to other regions. He reminded himself of the 2 tasks he'd been given. First, he had to survive for 3 days in this cave where monsters ran rampant. Second, he had to ensure the candle's flame never went out. If the flame died, he would fail. Soon enough, the first monster appeared. Ryuka dodged his attack and drew his aura sword, slashing it down instantly. The candle flared brighter from the surge of his power. He realized the candle drew on his energy, so he had to calm himself and narrow the flow like controlling water through a faucet. Once he did, the candle returned to its normal pace. He knew that in 3 days a bell would ring through the cave, marking the end of his trial. Until then, he had to protect the flame while dealing with the monsters. They looked ravenous, and he understood that if he failed, they would enjoy a feast at his expense. Ryuka admitted to himself that this trial felt almost impossible. No wonder others were so skeptical of him. Outside the cave, Kieran and Kenneth were observing the situation. Kenneth noted that it looked impossible. The trial seemed far too soon for Ryuka. Kieran countered that if the commander had made this decision, it was likely that some members of the order wouldn't be satisfied unless Ryuka was pushed to an extreme. He also admitted he had a feeling Ryuka might somehow manage it. Kenneth wasn't convinced, but he watched closely as Ryuka struggled to keep the flame alive while staying alive himself. If Ryuka tried to do this cautiously for 3 days, he realized it would just mean being slowly cornered with no room for error. Ryuka poured out an intense surge of power, making the candle flare brightly. The monsters recoiled, confused by the sudden size of the flame. He knew exactly what he was doing, drawing every last one of them to himself so he could finish them all at once. He didn't want to keep fighting endlessly with no break. As the monsters charged, he unleashed his aura in a massive blast, taking them down. When the smoke cleared, he caught his breath and wondered if this approach could actually work. Outside, Kieran and Kenneth watched. Kenneth shook his head, remarking that Ryuka seemed intent on wiping out every monster in the cave first, completely missing the point of the trial. Kieran, on the other hand, couldn't help but feel impressed. He told Kenneth that if Ryuka could pull it off, it was still pretty amazing. But then he noticed something odd and frowned, saying that for whatever was appearing now, it didn't make sense. Something fishy was going on. Back in the cave, Ryuka was exhausted but still holding the candle. He told himself that he had taken out a good number of monsters, but now he just had to shrink the flame and somehow keep it alive for 3 days. As he concentrated, a sudden strike of red aura hit near him. He turned and saw another monster slowly advancing toward him, making a strange chee-chee-chee-chee sound over and over. He muttered in confusion, wondering what it was. Kieran, having seen it too, nodded grimly and confirmed it. He said there was no mistake. That was Berserker. As the figure attacked Ryuka, it became clear that this wasn't just any monster. It had been developed by the Night Order itself as an anti-monster subjugation weapon. Kieran immediately called someone and demanded if this was their doing, using an experimental monster fighting weapon as part of a test run. He asked what on earth they were thinking. On the other side, the leader responded, saying it wasn't ridiculous. He was just testing a prototype, and the forest happened to be convenient. The cave Ryuka was in just happened to be nearby. Kieran, clearly frustrated, told the leader he expected him to understand the situation, but he couldn't even think about rushing in to help. The leader reminded him that in a test, one had to endure every difficulty and unfairness, and if Ryuka couldn't handle it, he failed. They didn't need a kid who couldn't manage. Reluctantly, Kieran said he understood, and the call ended with the leader laughing. A knock interrupted the tension, and Fran entered. The leader remarked about her lowering herself to play servant, to which Fran replied it was just a hobby. She asked how many sugars he wanted in his tea, and he said none. Noticing his mood, Fran commented that he seemed in good spirits today. The leader shrugged and said he wasn't in a bad mood. In an organization, fewer causes of concern meant a better day. Back in the cave, Ryuka noticed another monster watching him and the robot monster fight. When it attacked, he jumped to dodge, quickly preparing an aura ball in his hand and launching it at the monster while creating distance. He hoped it would be enough to take it down, but the monster kept coming, still aggressive. He couldn't understand why it wasn't working. Everything else so far had been defeated with similar tactics. Then he noticed the candle flickering even more brightly. He reminded himself to be careful. The monster readied another laser attack, and Ryuka started running again. He couldn't waste more of the candle's flame. Using fire drained him, and even if he attacked with it, there was no guarantee it would work. He needed another plan. He looked at the monster ahead, its eye locked onto him, and thought to himself that it had to have some weakness, some way to beat it. As Ryuka kept an eye on the monster, he suddenly realized it wasn't attacking. It was just watching him. But the moment he moved, the monster struck precisely at the point of his movement. Ryuka realized it was sensing his actions and firing based on them. If that was the case, he thought he could use it against itself. He rushed at the monster, swinging his sword from multiple angles, hoping to force it into a mistake. Sure enough, the monster ended up slicing itself in half with its own attack. Confidence surged through Ryuka. He gritted his teeth and yelled that he would make it cut itself down with its own beam, pouring all his aura into a massive strike. He dismantled the monster from its core, standing triumphantly, candle in hand. Ryuka saw the monster's wires ripped apart. He thought he had finally won. Fran, watching nearby, smiled and told him how impressive he was. The leader, however, said nothing, only commenting that the weapon still needed further refinement. Then he asked Fran for sugar in his tea, and she happily gave him a generous amount, noting he must be stressed. He told her she could leave now, adding that being a head branch shouldn't be so idle. Fran nodded in understanding and excused herself. Alone, the leader held his cup and muttered, still watching Ryuka, that it had only been insurance anyway, and that K wasn't going to let the brat walk out alive so easily. Day 3 of the trial of the Guardian Flame had arrived. In the darkness of the cave, Ryuka was utterly exhausted, but the candles still flickered. The bell hadn't rung yet. Only a few candles were left, and he was close to his limit. He looked ahead and saw that the monster's flesh had moved. It seemed as if the monster was trying to recreate itself. When the flesh shifted again, Ryuka realized it wasn't his imagination. The monster was regenerating. He wondered if it was because the magic power in this cave was too dense. He muttered that it had to be kidding him. Then a bright light appeared, and he suddenly heard the bell ring. Until the bell rang, Ryuka told himself he had to survive. He thought that as long as the candle stayed lit, he would live. He had to get out. The monsters, sensing his resolve, prepared to attack all at once. The candle's flame was tiny now. Even the slightest touch could extinguish it. Ryuka ran, dodging attacks and hoping the flame would hold. The monsters tried their best to strike him down. He finally spotted the exit, but a monster's blow hit him painfully. Still, he pushed forward, thinking only a little more, and he would make it. As he neared the exit, a voice called out, telling him to get down. He dropped just in time, and the monsters felt a tremendous power surge. Kieran said that time was up, and Ryuka had finally exited the cave. He hoped it was over. Kieran helped him up, praising his endurance. Ryuka, completely spent, passed out when he woke. He found himself seated in a ceremonial chamber. He realized this was the rite of passage. Arthur stood before him, along with many others. They all announced that from this moment, the rite of passage through the trial of the Guardian Flame would begin. Ryuka was shocked. Arthur explained that the Sacred Order of Knights was revealing their vows and arms to prove their trust in the new recruit, Ryuka. First came Kiera. She introduced herself as captain of the 9th Division, and said her vow was never to take a family. Then Fren steps forward and introduces herself, saying she is a captain of the 2nd Division, and that her vow is to forsake food for life. Next comes Kenneth, vice captain of the 2nd Division, who declares that his vow is never to tell a lie. Grift, captain of the 4th Division, follows, saying his vow is to dedicate his right arm to God. Jack, vice captain of the 6th Division, says his vow is to remain a virgin for life. Ryuka watches anxiously as everyone reveals their vows. Finally, he looks at the leader, Gavin, vice commander of the Sacred Order, who says that his vow is never to sleep, and that his shield is never to forgive those who betray the Order. Ryuka listens seriously, then introduces himself, saying he is Arthur, the commander of the Sacred Order, and that his vow is to renounce gender. Arthur then tells Ryuka to reveal his arms and his vow as a sign of trust. Everyone who just shared their vows watches him expectantly. Ryuka hesitates, then suddenly flares up with aura, changing into a monstrous form for a moment before returning to his normal self. He admits that he doesn't know his vow, saying that he gave up something precious without even understanding it. He recalls the words a monster had told him, realizing that it was something important, though he can't yet grasp what it was. Still, Ryuka declares that he will earn everyone's trust, become stronger than anyone, and protect people so that no one else gets hurt. He says he wants to save others before anything like that happens. Those who are friendly with him, Kiera, Fran, and Kenneth, smile with happiness at his words. The Order members then tell him that he will need to find strength from the flame of life before him. Arthur raises a sword and says that as proof of their trust and resolve, they accept him and welcome him into the Sacred Order Knights. Everyone salutes Ryuka, showing him respect. Ryuka watches, and the atmosphere brightens. As Arthur steps aside, Gavin comments that someone who can't even state their vows shouldn't be in the order. Arthur responds that Gavin himself had proposed that passing the trial, not knowing or stating one's vow, proves worthiness, even if it risks his life. Gavin argues that the boy's irregularity could endanger the Sacred Order or himself. Arthur assures him that Ryuka's flame grows stronger the closer he comes to death, and that it will become their strength. Arthur's words leave Gavin disappointed, but Fran and the others smile, happily welcoming Ryuka. Ryuka himself is glad to be part of the order, but is he just not going to wear a shirt? If we hit 2,000 likes, the next part drops instantly.